Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of York on this Wednesday, May 13th. We are the 22nd largest Rotary Club in the world, and we're very glad that you've joined us today, and we're very glad that you're staying connected with our club during these online programs. Today, our opening song will be provided by Alan Roth, who will perform Battle Hymn of the Republic, and our invocation will be offered by Steve Feldman. Alan, take it away, please.
Thanks, President Josh. Even though I know all of you Rotarians are most likely home alone, that's no reason to not join me in singing this very well-known hymn. So please join me now. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I'll now turn it over to Steve for the invocation.
Thank you, Alan. And let me say that there is a vicarious thrill in attending the Rotary Club of York in my genes. Please join me in prayer. O divine Lord and creator of all that is, I confess to you that I do not see the divine purpose in disease-carrying viruses. You and I have had this conversation before after I have been bitten by a swarm of mosquitoes, or when I see a sign on a Western golf course telling me to watch out for rattlesnakes. But I really do not get why something having to do with a bat in southern China should kill hundreds of thousands of my world neighbors. Where I do see your divine hand is in the lessons that we must learn and put into practice to overcome crises like this. Grant us your discipline, your compassion, and your rationality to see solutions to the problems of the COVID-19 pandemic. And remind us to use what you have given us to keep our wits about us, to see the beauty of creation, to hear music, to smell the blooming spring, to taste a freshly baked pie, and to touch the hand of a loved one, then wash quickly. Thank you for the gift of Rotary, whose enduring principles of fairness, truthfulness, and concern for all represent valuable guides to weather the storms of crisis. Strengthen us to live these principles for the betterment of our community, our nation, and our world. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Alan. In our normal meetings, we normally go to visitor introductions right now, and I've been trying to work with Courtney to figure out how in the world we could introduce our visitors, but we haven't come up with a plan for that yet. So if you do have any visitors and you know they're going to be with us for future meetings, please let us know and we'll try to recognize them as best we can like we would normally do. So on to a quick few announcements today. First and foremost, I would, as I mentioned last week, Program Committee Chair Mike Summers is looking for program ideas, particularly those that are well suited to an online format. Mike has been doing yeoman's work over the last several weeks, in fact, 8 weeks now, trying to juggle programs, move people around in the schedule, fill gaps where programs that were supposed to happen haven't. Mike, thank you very much for all that you've done over the last few weeks to make this work. And please reach out to Mike with any program ideas that you have. We're always looking for ways to keep everyone connected with the Rotary Club, and the best way we can do that right now is through really good programs. Now, hopefully you've had a chance to see that we have prepared our first ever annual report. So for the 2018-2019 Rotary year, we now have a completed annual report. All of the hard work on this report was done by Sue Ann Klein and Ken Cooper, and somehow or another, they managed to make Brian Tate look good. Brian, you know what I mean. So if you have a chance, please go to our website. The annual report is under the tab called Resources, and just click on that tab, resources. You'll find a drop down that says annual reports, and then you'll be able to click on and look at our 2018-2019 club annual report, our first ever. Thanks again to Sue Ann and Ken for all the hard work on that. As you know, we wrapped up Give Local York on May 1st, and the results are in, and we did very well. We raised over $23,000, but more interestingly, we actually nearly doubled the amount of money that we raised from last year, and we saw a 36% increase in the number of donors from 2019 to 2020. Really appreciate everybody stepping up and supporting the Kiwanis Lake project through our Give Local York efforts. Give Local York is our largest fundraiser that has been dedicated solely to money for Kiwanis Lake. Some of the money from the fall fundraiser with the golf tennis outing, assuming that goes off as it usually has, will probably also be donated for the Kiwanis Lake project, but we have several other things that we're looking to use that money for as well this fall. But thanks again to everybody who contributed, and many thanks to Darren Smith and Dee Baker for all of your work getting Give Local York up, running, and ready for our club and the Kiwanis Lake project. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Dee. Now, you may have seen an email come in from Rotary International over the last couple of weeks, letting you know that the annual RI convention, which had been originally planned for Hawaii coming up in about 3 weeks, has now been moved to an online format. This will be a first ever for RI to do an online convention. It'll be very interesting to see how it works. And if you have the opportunity, please go to the RI website. You can look for the information about the conference, which is now being held between June 20th and June 26th. Also, many of you have had the opportunity to meet and get to know your college student and former youth exchange student, David Boboade is how it is, I think. He is in need of a place to stay for the next year or so while he finishes his mechanical engineering program at your college. If you've had a chance to get to know David, he's a really nice guy, very easygoing, probably would not even be noticeable in your house, but he's in need of somebody to help support him. So if you have a chance, please reach out to Walt Tilley. And if you know somebody who can host David, or if you can do that yourself, please let Walt know. And I do have one final announcement. Get well wishes go out to my mom, Karen Mitchell, who unfortunately had an incident with her bicycle in a railroad track, and unfortunately also on Mother's Day. She took a tumble off her bike. Mom, she broke her collarbone, unfortunately, but is doing well, and she's resting and is recovering. And the thing that was most interesting to me is that she said that she can't wait to get back on her bike. So I was really glad to hear that. Hopefully she'll be able to do that very soon. Mom, I think you're watching today. Really hope you have a speedy recovery. I love you, and let's not do this again. All right, those are the announcements for today. It is time for our poll. So as we've done in previous weeks, you should have on your screen the poll. There it is. And we're trying to mix up the questions, do something a little bit different this week. So the question this week is, how has your business been affected by COVID-19? There's 4 choices. Our sales have improved, our sales have declined, we haven't seen much of a change, or I'm retired and I really don't care. If you could, please vote right now and we'll tally the results. And Courtney then will be able to read us the results as they come in here over the next few seconds. As always, we're looking for poll ideas too. So in addition to good programs, if you have ideas for a fun poll that we can do with everybody, please let me or Courtney know, and we'll make sure that poll gets on to next week's meeting or the following week. We're always looking for something funny, something interesting, something unique, anything that you might have. So Courtney, how are we doing on the results?
Doing good. 70 people have voted so far. I'm going to give it 10 more seconds for you to vote, and then I will read the response. Okay, so the results are in. And how has your business been affected by COVID-19? 40% are saying that their sales have declined. 33% are saying they're retired. 18% we have not seen a change, and 8% our sales have improved. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting and probably a microcosm of the broader economy where certain businesses are doing very well during this time, but the majority have either stayed the same or declined. It's interesting to hear that kind of playing out locally too. Thanks to everybody for voting, and we'll see what we come up with for next week's poll. Now, as I've been doing for several weeks now, I'd like to jump over to our local business spotlight. It's been a privilege for me to be able to spotlight our local businesses, and we've looked at both for-profit and nonprofit businesses, and we've even looked at a governmental entity. So this week, our spotlight is on the York County Community Foundation, and Jane Conover was kind enough to provide some information for us about what the Community Foundation's doing and a little bit about their history. So they've been around since 1961 and nearly 60 years of helping folks throughout our community. And probably many of our Rotarians and fellow members have either served on the board or a committee at YCCF over the years, or perhaps have even been employed there. And thanks to all of our Rotarians for being involved with the foundation. Every year, they provide sustainable revenue to about 150 nonprofit partners. They manage about $160 million in endowments, an amazing amount of money here locally. $6 million of grants and scholarships each year. And of course, front and center in our minds right now is the work that they're doing with the United Way and some other local foundations in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The first round of grants were sent out and issued a couple of weeks ago, and that totaled about $186,000. That's awesome work. Really glad that they've been able to do that so quickly and made such an impact on the community. So if you want more information about the Community Foundation, reach out to Jane or Phil Woods. Both can help you and let you know anything you need to know about what they're doing and all the good work that they have done in the community. Thanks again, Jane and Phil, for what you're doing. Okay, let's move over and introduce our program. Today we have 3 judges from the York County Court of Common Pleas. We have President Judge Joe Adams, we have Rotarian Judge Maria Musti Cook, and we have former Rotarian and current Uptown Rotarian Judge Andrea Marceca Strong, who are going to talk about what's going on in the York County Court of Common Pleas and how they've been affected by the COVID pandemic. And we're going to start with Judge Cook, and we're going to run from there. Thank you for being here with us, and please take it away.
Thank you, Josh. I'd like to begin by asking all of you to sit back and think about what you were doing or planning at the time you realized that COVID-19 had struck York County, and particularly here in Pennsylvania. For me, it was the week of March the 8th. I was on vacation in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and I was watching the news every morning to look at reports from Northern Italy, particularly where I have my aunt and my cousins residing. And I would get text messages from them telling me about how everything was closed there. There were police patrols roaming the streets, making sure everybody was staying at home, and the whole country was on lockdown. It all seemed pretty surreal and happening very far, far away. In South Carolina, where I was, it was business as usual. Everyone was shopping, sitting by the pool, golfing, dining out, and there was no concept of social distancing. By Thursday of that week, I was on a conference call with my fellow York College trustees to talk about the closing of the college for a short period, 2 weeks we anticipated. I then texted back to the Judicial Center and said, hey, are we still having those jury trials next week for our last week of the term? And at that point, there weren't any plans to change anything. But by the time we were packing up to leave Friday and traveling home on Saturday, we were hearing about schools closing, events being canceled. But at the same time, we had no problem stopping at a very crowded restaurant in Maryland for dinner on the way home with, again, no social distancing in place. By Sunday night, I learned that jurors were being contacted not to report to the Judicial Center the next day. And we had our first emergency court conference on Monday, March 16th. At that time, we started talking about how we were going to move forward. On Wednesday, I had a criminal court conference. We discussed plans to modify the court schedule to reduce the number of people coming into the building, both employees and the public. But by the very next day, our plans were pretty much out the window as the first stay-at-home order had been announced. And so for the next week, almost a daily basis, our plans were in a constant state of flux. Our former way of doing business no longer applied. And before I give you specific information about the criminal court system, I'm going to turn it over to our President Judge Joe Adams to talk to you about his view on how life has been with COVID-19.
Thank you, Judge Cook. I'm going to start by taking us back in time. For hundreds of years, the layout of the courtroom hasn't changed. We have bench for spectators to sit. We have counsel table for attorneys and their clients to sit. We have a jury box. We have a witness stand. We have a bench for the judge to see everything that's going on. In March of this year, all of that changed. We knew at some point in time there would be a catastrophe that we needed to deal with. We do have a continuity of operations plan. In fact, the day I became PJ, I was handed this rather large book, continuity of operations plan, and it dealt with every scenario that you can think of: a terrorist attack, a flood, a fire. The unique thing about the pandemic is that all of the scenarios that we contemplated in that book were different than what we had and what we were facing. All of those scenarios dealt with not having access to this building. So if there was a fire and somehow courtrooms got destroyed, where would we go? All that was planned for. But with the pandemic, it was different. People were required to stay at home. This building is functioning properly. It's working great. So the issue became, what do we do when we can't get people inside the building? Unfortunately, due process does not stop during a pandemic. There are still domestic violence cases that are occurring. There are defendants that need their day in court. There are involuntary mental health commitments that are taking place. And these are just a few of the things that we do routinely each day in this building. So on March 18th of this year, our state Supreme Court declared a judicial emergency, in essence, closing all 67 courthouses to the general public except for emergency matters. As you can see on the board, those are the emergency matters that we were permitted to do, mostly dealing with domestic violence cases and juvenile matters. The directive indicated that we were not to have any jury trials, but we were encouraged to use advanced communication technology when and where we could. And advanced communication technology is just another fancy way of saying pick up the phone to do phone conferencing or some sort of video conferencing. And so we as judges scrambled to figure out what to do. And we decided on using a platform called Zoom. Now, 2 months ago, I had never even heard of Zoom. I had no idea what it was. And it wasn't until a friend of mine who's an attorney sent me a link to a YouTube video that was being done by 2 judges down in Texas. And they were showing how they use Zoom in the courtroom to conduct all of their hearings. It was a rather lengthy video. It was about 2 hours long. And I walked away from that absolutely amazed by what they were able to do. We had thought about using advanced communication technology in the past, and we have great technology in this building, but there were 4 hurdles that we had to overcome before we could utilize any of those services. And the first was, how do we address the issue of attorneys needing to speak privately with their clients? Throughout a hearing, an attorney needs to get that communication privately with his client or his or her client. And we needed that ability to do that. Fortunately, Zoom has a feature called breakout rooms that allows us to, in essence, create a conference room. Much like what we have in the courthouse now, we have 2 ancillary rooms outside of each of our courtrooms that are, in essence, conference rooms for clients to meet with their counsel. A breakout room is exactly that. It gives the judge, as a host of the meeting, the opportunity to put individuals into a breakout room so they can confer privately. So that was the first hurdle that we overcame. The second hurdle was sequestration. So oftentimes in a court case, we have a request by one of the parties to sequester a witness. And for obvious reasons, we don't want that witness to testify based upon what they've heard in court, but rather based upon their own independent recollection of events. So we needed, in essence, a way to keep them out of the hearing until we were ready for them. Zoom has a feature called a waiting room, which allows us to put them outside of the courtroom. It's not a breakout room. It's a separate room where they are by themselves. And then when we're ready for them, we bring them inside the court, just like what we would do in a regular court proceedings. The third hurdle that we had were interpretation services. We have a rather large Spanish community in York, and we oftentimes find ourselves needing interpreters. In fact, every day I think the interpreters are being used in this building. Zoom does have an interpretation feature which allows an interpreter to communicate with a LEP, a limited English proficient participant, so as to provide in real time the interpretation. And it has worked fairly well for us. The final hurdle that we had were exhibits. So as you can imagine, some court cases are rather document intensive, and there is a lot of shuffling of paper back and forth between an attorney and their client. And sometimes those documents need to be annotated. So we needed a way for that to happen. So much like in court, we have the ability to, as you can see right now on our screen, put documents up so everybody can see them at the same time, and not only see them, but also annotate them. And so that provides us the benefit to get that done during the course of a proceeding. So Zoom has really been a godsend for us. It really accomplishes everything that we've needed to get our hearings done, albeit it does take a little bit longer when we're dealing with it. So as I look back during this time, in a few years from now, as I look back, I'm going to really view this as different waves that hit us. And the first wave that hit us as a judiciary is obviously the pandemic and the requirement that we not have people inside the building. But not only the public, we also had the issue of trying to keep our employees safe. We have hundreds of people that work in this building. We have judges and their staff, many of whom are of a certain age that makes them vulnerable to the pandemic. And so our concern was to make sure that everybody was safe. So one of the things that we did in response to that was to limit the number of judges that are in this building at any time. So as it currently stands, we only have 5 judges of our complement in at any time. And when they're not scheduled to be in, they cannot come inside the building, nor are their staff allowed to come in. The other thing that we did is we asked a lot of our row officers to do things remotely. So we had their staff work at home to the best they can. So that really was beneficial to us, and it worked. The second wave, as I like to think of it, is getting judges and lawyers to adopt Zoom as a technology. Lawyers and judges hate change. I mean, by our very nature, we are opposed to change. And so it has been interesting, to say the least, to try to get everybody on board. And I cannot say enough to our Bar Association, in particular Victoria Connor, who has done an incredible job of getting people to feel comfortable using Zoom. I can't tell you how many courses they have held demonstrating Zoom, not only for lawyers and judges, but also municipalities. In fact, just yesterday, we had another conference where we did a Zoom mock trial. They have been fantastic. Our judges have created workflows for lawyers to use when they're in proceedings. That has been very helpful. I've even done some YouTube videos where I show lawyers how to share their screen and use interpretation features. So the third wave is really where we're at right now. And unfortunately, as many of you know, we had to furlough some employees a few weeks ago. In fact, we lost about 20% of our staff to furloughs. And that has certainly limited what we can do remotely even. And so we were on board. The commissioners came to the judges and explained the reasonings for it. And we certainly understand that, and we were on board with that. But it has limited our abilities at this time. So we are working through that. We do have cases that are still being held. Our judicial emergency extends through the end of this month. So May 31st, it is scheduled to expire. And hopefully come June 1st, we will be in a better position. Hopefully we'll have some of our furloughed employees back. But the problem that's going to remain for us, at least in the near future, is social distancing. So even if we were to go to yellow status tomorrow, we still need to make sure that everybody's safe in this building, and in particular for jury trials, because at some point we're going to need to start doing those again. And we're already looking at ways to modify our courtrooms to make it such that we can keep people in the courtroom, do what we need to do, but at the same time keep them safe. So that's where we are now, and that's where we are moving. And so I'll turn it over to Judge Strong at this time.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Marceca Strong, and I'm glad to be back at a downtown club meeting. I've been scooting over to the Uptown Club where I'm a member now, and I'm looking forward to coming back down to the Yorktown when that eventually gets done. Most people understand that family court deals mainly with custody and divorce matters. However, a lot of our time is spent on abuse-related cases, both for adults and children. During the pandemic, our focus has been on ensuring the welfare is protected for the most vulnerable populations in York County. In both the family and the civil division, that means ensuring access to the judicial center, as Judge Adams indicated, and to the court for anyone who needs protection from abuse, both adults, older adults, children, anyone who needs that protection. Our civil division judges have been assisting with handling final hearings for private petitions to protect the adults and children, including, again, the older adult population, while the criminal division, and we really appreciate their assistance, have been helping us with the violation hearings, again, to ensure that people remain safe, particularly when they are stuck with some people who are not behaving appropriately. The family court judges initially focused then on handling temporary orders for the private applications for protection, as well as the children, youth, and families requests to protect children who are in abusive situations. We also received requests from juvenile probation to address children that needed placed because they were a danger to themselves or the community. As family court judges, we review matters where children are placed outside of the home, and those are matters that we're filling up our time because there are a lot of children in placement. We were trying to get out of placement, especially with the concerns for COVID-19 and anything that was statutorily required to be heard, and many of those children cases are required to be heard, we were still holding them. Though many of the cases are able to be handled in person, and I gave you a slide earlier about some things were handled in person, those do qualify. A lot of them, we have had this benefit of Zoom and alternative courtroom technology to allow at least some, if not all of the participants to participate remotely. At this point, I think most of us are trying to have everyone participate remotely to ensure social distancing and also to avoid the transportation of children, especially for far distances. When we move forward through this judicial emergency, the judges in the family and civil division are adding various matters to their schedule that can be handled by remote access. Again, we continue to work through our backlog. We know there will be a large backlog. We're doing our best to give people their day in court, understanding the restrictions that we're under. As parties and attorneys become more comfortable with the remote access, such as Zoom or conference calling, we're hoping that moving forward as we're scheduling things that at least the witnesses will appear by electronic technology, and then that will allow the parties themselves and their counsel to be in the courtroom, but also social distancing, because we do want to keep not only the parties safe, their counsel safe, all of the court staff safe, and comply with whatever recommendations there are to keeping that process moving. We do hope to be back on schedule in the fall. As Judge Adams has indicated, we're still working through these issues like everybody else, waiting to hear what status we'll be in. And regardless of moving into yellow or green, we still need to look forward to ensuring that everyone feels safe coming in, but also everyone has access to the court system, which is required under our Constitution. So I really don't have anything else at this point, but I'm happy to answer questions later. I'm going to turn it over to Judge Musti Cook.
Thank you, Andrea. I would hazard a guess that about 90 days ago, Corona was just a beer we all drank on Cinco de Mayo. And since then, we've added some terms to our everyday vocabulary that we didn't even know existed: COVID-19, social distancing, PPE, Zoom hearings, and Zoom meetings. By way of a very general background, our criminal court system operates on a continuous cycle, with certain things scheduled in even-numbered months and certain things scheduled in odd-numbered months. During even-numbered months, we have 2 weeks of pre-trials and plea dates where we take guilty pleas among 5 judges. In odd-numbered months, we have a 3-week trial term for jury trials. And customarily, our jury trial term will include about 300 cases listed. Of course, we don't actually hear 300 cases in that 3-week term. We probably hear about 10 to 15% of the list that actually go to trial. A lot of things end in pleas and some matters get continued. Again, we do have 5 judges sitting in criminal court. In our even-numbered months, we handle about 1,500 pretrial conferences among the 5 of us over that 2-week period. In addition, in all those other extra weeks, we schedule things like parole and probation violations, bail modification hearings, summary conviction appeals, bench warrants, arraignments, pretrial motion hearings, sentencing hearings, post-conviction relief hearings, non-jury trials, and meetings with police officers to issue search warrants, as well as we are currently assisting the family court in holding the indirect criminal contempt hearings, which are for violations of protection from abuse orders. When COVID-19 hit and the governor and the Supreme Court orders directed only the hearings of essential matters to limit the number of people who would be brought into the judicial center, we really had to scale back our operations. We were limited to in-person doing bench warrants, search warrant applications, bail hearings, and habeas hearings where a defendant would assert that he has been wrongfully charged or incarcerated. As Judge Adams indicated, the judges were limited to the number of days that they could come into the building, and our staff was also limited in terms of their presence in the building. For the month of April, which again is an even-numbered month, we had 1,603 pretrial conferences canceled. Not rescheduled, just canceled, which means all of those cases now get put on the trial list or for some other resolution, which will have to be specially scheduled. By the middle of April, we had canceled our 3-week main trial term. 503 cases were listed on that trial term. So as you can see, our backlog does continue to grow, but we are making efforts to address that. During the month of April, we expanded our essential matters to include taking guilty pleas, handling arraignments and parole violations for those who were incarcerated, as we could do that, and we always had done that in cases by video from the prison. As again, Judge Adams indicated, our Supreme Court encouraged us to use modern technology to add additional matters that could be handled without bringing anyone into the judicial center. And that's how we all learned what Zoom was. Our President Judge acquired licenses, and we participated in those trainings and attended webinars so we could begin to expand our court days. So you might ask yourself, well, what does a judge do when they're not sitting in the judicial center? What can you do from home? Well, we're at home doing research, writing opinions, and in fact, conducting some on-the-record proceedings, such as our treatment courts. Our treatment courts have continued to operate during this pandemic. We do that by Zoom. Our participants come in by Zoom, and they're able to phone in or get on their computers or iPads and join us. And I think it's been incredibly important for those participants to continue to have that court contact. We also are beginning to increase our physical time in the building and the number of proceedings that we can handle by Zoom to include those defendants who are not incarcerated, but have access to computers or smartphones and can join us by Zoom. Zoom hearings do take more time. They do slow down the process, and they add a scheduling burden to our staffs. But there were times when we once called in large groups of people all to arrive at the same hour, 9 o'clock in the morning on a trial day, 9 o'clock in the morning on a summary conviction appeal day. And now we have to schedule all those matters individually. So obviously that slows down the process. And even when the restrictions are lessened, we will still have to schedule things individually in order to maintain safe and social distancing. We have encountered difficulties with defendants who don't want to be heard by Zoom, attorneys who don't believe that their clients should have to attend by Zoom, and procedural rules which sometimes make streamlining things more difficult. But we do our best to keep moving forward. A lot of people ask me, well, when are you going to have a jury trial again, and what's it going to look like? And as Judge Adams indicated, we discuss this probably on a weekly basis. It will not return anytime in the foreseeable future in the same manner as we had in the past. In the past, on that first day of the week, on each of our 3 weeks of trial term, we would have 150 to 200 jurors entering our building and sitting in the judicial assembly room or jury assembly room and waiting for their turn to be called to go upstairs to sit on a trial. Well, obviously that room cannot afford to social distance 150 to 200 people. So we are working on plans to have more of a continuous cycle of a trial term so that we can bring panels in of a size somewhere in the range of 25 to 40 people and split them up into several different rooms. But in addition to just putting them in for selection purposes, we have to find a place for them to deliberate and a place for them to be selected from a smaller panel into the actual 12 to 13 jurors that might sit on a trial. So all of this, of course, requires our constant research and planning, and we will need to consider how to revamp our courtrooms to accommodate social distancing, and what kind of changes in our basic schedule will bring about the change we need in order to get things back on track. It is an ever-evolving work in progress, but we continue to move forward. So thank you all for your time, and I guess, Josh, if you have questions for us, we could take those now.
All right, thank you very much, Judge Adams, Judge Cook, and Judge Strong. And we do have some questions. So let's start with a funny one. Here we go. And any of you can take this one. So now that you're doing a lot of your work through Zoom, are you allowed to wear shorts underneath your robe?
Well, technically, we can always wear shorts under our robe because nobody sees what's under our robe, but I don't think we've tried that yet.
Doesn't really feel like you're working if you're not, dressed up, I guess.
Right. I've joked previously that on Wednesdays is the only day I wear a collared shirt anymore. So it's all just a sort of a unique experience for all of us. All right, let's see. The next question is do you anticipate using Zoom as a way of efficiently processing more cases than is currently possible?
Yeah, I think the hope is that we will continue to use Zoom in the future. It really has checked all the boxes for us. Like I said, we've considered using different platforms before, but we always had those hurdles to overcome. We'd prefer not to bring in people, especially when we have prisoners across the state or juveniles, and bring them back for hearings unnecessarily. So yeah, it's something we're going to try to continue to use in the future.
All right, here's a question for Judge Strong. Is Judicial Assistant Philly with you in the courtroom?
She is. Today is a day she has off. Monday was her birthday. You can all wish her happy birthday on Facebook. So she had a birthday. She has been in when I'm in, and she has actually attended on Mondays and Thursdays when she comes in, those hearings for protection from abuse hearings where someone is struggling. She has been actually going into the courtroom and assisting even through the judicial emergency. So she's still working hard. Today is not a day for those matters, and I knew I had this and a lot of other things, so I gave her the day off to run around.
And just so everyone knows who may not be aware, Philly is a dog.
Yes. She's
Not
a
a
service
daughter.
dog. She's a service dog who's placed with the family court. She is certainly able to be used by other judges and other proceedings, not just my proceedings. That's why, because I don't have that assignment right now, she is assisting other judges. She has her own calendar, and she really has been a great benefit and asset to the family court, especially when it deals with children testimony and children interviews, and again, abuse victims of any sort who require some assistance, children with special needs. She's especially able to interact with, and she can follow various cues to calm them down and help them get through the proceedings. I'll tell her you asked about her.
Absolutely. Okay, the next question. This is a little bit of a tougher one, and so any or all of you who'd like to jump in, would any of you wish to comment on District Attorney Sunday's position on citing businesses for non-compliance with the governor's stay-at-home order? It seems that as a county official, he's appearing partisan with his very public announcement. Is this appropriate for him in the position as DA? Everybody's raising their hand on that one.
I'll defer to Judge Cook. She does criminal matters.
Judge Adams, as you say. No, I can't say that I have any comment. I haven't actually, although I've heard about the statement, I haven't actually observed the statement myself, so I'm not going to comment at this time.
Anyone else want that hot potato?
I say it's probably really not appropriate for us to comment on that unless it becomes an issue before us. So we really probably should shy away from that.
So let me ask maybe an easier follow-up. So what's the relationship then between the state and the county in this regard? we're hearing different things from the state. We're seeing different results at the county level. What is that relationship in this specific instance?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the DA is charged with enforcing the law. Unfortunately, there are other avenues that the governor has available to him above and beyond that. So there are licensing issues that people will be facing if they choose to ignore the governor's orders. And so, yeah, I'm sure those things will be litigated in the near future.
So then you will be able to comment on it then, perhaps.
I'm sure there'll be an opinion, not only by us, but by the Supreme Court at some time.
Yeah.
Since he's not a judge, we have different restrictions on what we can do and comment on than what the district attorney can comment on, if that helps you. We have more restrictions on what we can say, or we can't really have a personal opinion. We have to follow the law, whatever the law says that we have to do. So when it's properly before us, we'll render a decision.
It strikes me as interesting because you have the state police who are under the direction of the state, but any citations that they may cite are then dealt with by the district attorney at the county level.
Sure.
It really creates an interesting, maybe dichotomy here in this particular instance. And yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Okay, let's move on here. Let me read this one. With the adjustments that have happened through this pandemic, what does it mean for the future? And that is, are there processes that you have adopted now that will make the courts more efficient or shift how the courts function?
Yeah, like I had mentioned, there is a silver lining to this. It really forced us to get out of our comfort zone. Like I had mentioned, we have been doing things the same way for hundreds of years, and we needed this, a little bit of a kick to get us moving in a different direction. And we found that in Zoom that affords us some opportunities to do things a little bit better. We can save a lot of money by reducing the number of transports that occur. So yeah, there is a silver lining to it. It's been an awful situation, but we've definitely learned from it.
I would agree. I think that for the criminal system, as Joe said, we've been doing this the same way for decades, or if not centuries, and it's time to revisit how we schedule things, what we give priority to, and how we might better do that. And I think this pandemic has forced us to take a second look at that, a really hard look at that, because we're going to be overwhelmed when the doors open, and we're going to have to find different ways of dealing with the numbers of cases that we have. And I think that will move into the future as well.
I will say we were accommodating some things by alternative courtroom technology. We don't have the same restrictions as the criminal court. And there were, in appropriate circumstances, accommodations made to allow for telephonic testimony and to allow for prisoners to participate in civil proceedings by either telephone or video conferencing. We were not using Zoom as our platform, and there were a lot of restrictions on what we could do, as Judge Adams indicated. So we could only have one person on, and only for a certain period of time. And Zoom has really opened up an opportunity to allow a number of people to participate at the same time from different locations. I think that definitely with the family court, it was an easy transition to expand, and certainly something that we can use moving forward. Definitely in the short run, my orders already have in them that even if the judicial emergency is lifted, only counsel and the parties will be present in the courtroom, and everyone else will participate electronically.
So with the judicial emergency, how is that, or is it not at all, related to the governor's declarations about red, yellow, and green? Are they connected in any way?
We certainly look to the governor for guidance, but we are a separate branch of the government, and we have to take the lead of our Supreme Court. And so when they declare something, that falls down the line, and that's something that we need to adhere to. So although we might be moving to yellow according to the governor's plans, we really take the lead of the Supreme Court, and they'll tell us whether or not we're permitted to be open. We certainly use the governor's suggestions in terms of social distancing and whatnot, but really our marching orders come down from the Supreme Court.
So the next question is For many years and for as long as anyone can remember, the sheriff's deputies have been a visual presence in the court proceedings. What role are they playing now?
There's still a presence in the court proceedings. We can't take the bench unless the deputy is there. They are still serving papers, they're serving warrants, they're still taking custody of defendants, those that have to be brought into the courthouse, and Judge Musti Cook can address this more fully, obviously are transported by our sheriff's department. They're still fully functioning as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a major change. There may be fewer courtrooms up at the same time, but they're in the courtroom. They're doing their jobs as they always did, wearing masks and gloves, but still there.
Okay, next question for Judge Adams. Will you consider following in the footsteps of your fellow judges and becoming a Rotarian?
Yeah. The problem with the PJ is we have lots of meetings to go to, and they're almost always on Wednesdays. So yeah, it's been difficult, but I've been to several Rotary meetings and I've enjoyed every one of them.
Come back anytime, online or in person.
Thank you.
Okay, is there an expectation to bring back all of the employees who were furloughed after the pandemic? And are you considering strategies for how the court might operate after this is over?
Yeah, the plan is to have them all back. Hopefully that will happen shortly, but obviously commissioners will dictate to us when we can have them back. But that is the hope.
All right, you'd mentioned earlier about some of the attorneys who are working through this time period. Why would any of them be opposed necessarily to participating in Zoom proceedings as opposed to traditional methods?
Well, from the criminal side, if you have a Zoom proceeding where defense counsel is perhaps in their office or in my courtroom, but their client is at the prison or at home, it's difficult for them to communicate with their client without stopping the proceedings. You know, the communication is not as ongoing as if they were sitting next to them in the courtroom. So there have been some issues raised about that, as well as Zoom capabilities are not as prevalent among our magisterial district judges. So their setup in their office is not as conducive to having remote technology for the defendant and in presence of counsel. So that creates some of its own issues as well. So there are some legitimate concerns, but there are not insurmountable concerns.
For our division, I think the initial concern was it was new. As President Judge Adams reviewed with everyone, we like consistency and process and everything being the same way, everyone doing everything the same way. So it was new and they weren't really aware of how it was going to function. And even today, I had attorneys that weren't quite sure that they understood that I really don't know what they're doing in the breakout room. I have no idea what they're doing. I can't monitor that. So with all the trainings that Victoria Connor has had through the Bar Association, and President Judge Adams has done a number of those trainings to show counsel this is how it works. And I think as they participate, I find that more and more they're more comfortable with it. Not so much about long protracted hearings and sharing their screen and showing exhibits by Zoom, but that can be handled by trial notebooks, and we're working through those issues. So it's really the unknown, I think, is more of what we're seeing in the family division. On it takes a lot more planning to plan your day if you are planning it out by Zoom than if you just show up with your file and you're able to sort of work, I don't want to say on the fly, but some of the attorneys know their job and they're able to do it more easily in person than planning it out by Zoom.
I think also one of the initial complaints or concerns was people wouldn't have access to the technology. And what I found is that's the exception rather than the rule. Most people have a smartphone or access to a smartphone, and that's really all you need to participate by Zoom.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that most kids now are using Zoom, and so parents have had to use it as well to help them. And so there's this comfort factor with it.
Yeah, certainly true in all of our lives as well. Next question is Is there a date at which the Judicial Center will be back open, given the May 31st expiration of the judicial emergency? And then, if so, what protocols will be put in place to make sure that everyone's doing the best they can with masks or social distancing?
Sure. The judicial emergency runs through May 31st. So come June 1st, the public will have access to the building. So we won't be limiting the people coming in. However, we will be requiring social distancing in the courtroom. So unless something changes from the Supreme Court where they extend the emergency, June 1st, we will be letting people in the building. But once they're in, it's really going to be up to each judge to maintain that inside their courtroom to make sure that there is social distancing. So we're only going to allow so many people in the courtroom at a time. As I mentioned, we're going to try to reconfigure some of the courtrooms for when we do move to a jury trial, so to give enough space between people and the jury. So those are things that we're continuing to work on.
That's good. I'm going to put the next two questions together here if I can. So how are orphans court cases held, for example, adoptions and incapacities? And then are the divorce masters working from home, and how are they holding settlement conferences?
Okay, well, both the orphans court is still functioning. They were not scheduling the same types of hearings previously, but they are now with the some of the transitioning back to full time. Our orphans court judges are scheduling some of the orphans court proceedings in the courtroom if they fall under the permissive court proceedings, or electronic communication for those who don't, those proceedings that don't. The divorce masters have been great. They have really helped the court with holding conferences and scheduling hearings. They are working from home and in the judicial center. So as Judge Adams indicated, we have limited times when we are able to be in the courtrooms and in the courthouse. So there are some matters that have been scheduled before the divorce master, again, moving forward. We also have conciliators that have been working. They were doing a lot of their conferences by phone so that we didn't stop determining custodial arrangements for people that needed to have a decision made. We were still moving those cases along, but not having them handled in the courthouse. Support conferences were also conducted by phone because people who are caring for their children need support and need a determination by the judge and the court as to how much someone should pay. Those conferences were also proceeding. I'm here handling the de novos, so if you're not satisfied with those proceedings, then you can come to see a judge, and we've been trying to schedule those through alternative technology.
Great. Next question is how are you addressing both the security and the confidentiality issues that arise by using online platforms like Zoom, potentially being hacked or anything else?
Yeah, that's a good question, one that comes up quite frequently. Our proceedings are public. Most of them are all public. So if someone were to Zoom bomb us, as they say, it is a public proceeding. So anybody could come into any hearing that we have in the courthouse at any time. So that's really not an issue for us. But there are some security features in Zoom that allow us to, one, create a waiting room. So the judge as the host has the ability to permit people to come into the hearing. So nobody actually enters the hearing without the judge's approval. And if someone were to come in, we could also then throw them out of the hearing if we wanted to. And there's another feature, the security feature that was just added that allows us to lock a courtroom once we start so no one could enter. So Zoom has really stepped up their security features for us.
It's good to hear. We've heard a lot of stuff online about Zoom bombing, and it's not always the kind of stuff you want in public consumption.
Yeah. There are some hearings that are closed. We do have restrictions also. You're not permitted to record in any way any proceeding. Only our certified court reporters are allowed to record, and they do so through transcription. So we do notify everyone who gets the Zoom notice. They're not allowed to do that. Those proceedings that are closed, we ensure that, as Judge Adams said, we're not letting in someone who's not supposed to be in those hearings. So for those adoptions that are held, only those people who are permitted to attend, because those are one of the limited closed proceedings, are actually let into the Zoom hearing.
Have you seen an increase or a decrease in any specific kinds of cases? And specifically, this question mentions abuse, probably just out of the fact that people are being home all the time. But has there been any change in the cases that you've seen over the last 2 months?
I would say the concern has been the drop in referrals to children, youth, and families, which has caused a reduction in the petitions that are filed by that agency. A lot of referrals come from schools and doctors and neighbors who observe children and are able to identify possible abuse occurring, and just simply calling the hotline. The hotline, once some of the statutory requirements changed a few years ago, when we in York County have the third highest referral rate in the state, there has been a reduction in those referrals, which causes a reduction in the petitions being filed, because the agency is trying to investigate as they get referrals. But I think that there's a problem with getting the referrals or having eyes on a child. Some of the schools are offering free lunches, and that has been a draw, and they have been trained, as I understand it, at least in the city schools, and I'm sure in other school districts, of some of the things to look for that and communication to have with the children to try to identify that, but there has been a drop in that. As far as private petitions, they've still had, everyone's had access to the courthouse, both for emergency orders, which are handled overnight by the magisterial district judges and by the common pleas judges if they come in during the day. That has continued to be pretty constant, steady.
Any follow-up on the criminal side at all, Maria?
I don't know that there's been an increase. I think actually crime is considered to be down right now, and I can't say exactly if that's COVID connected, if that's people having more important things to worry about than some of our lesser crimes. I can't really answer that question. I would say that sadly, we are aware that the number of overdose deaths in York County has increased during the pandemic. I think that results from probably a number of different reasons, but primarily probably a lack of access to the usual services that would be available to people who are struggling with substance abuse.
Judge Adams, a question for you. Can you comment on how the magisterial district courts are operating during this time period?
Yeah, they were subject to the same rules that we were. They were limited to only having preliminary hearings for those that were incarcerated. We have been piloting for the last week, almost 2 weeks now. Some of the MDJs are using Zoom, and so they're fine tuning that. And our hope is that we're going to roll that out to all 19 MDJs very shortly.
Great. And we'll finish up with this one. How are the clerks of the row offices being used?
Yeah, let me just say this: they're doing a fantastic job. I'm sure Brian Tate's on watching, but I want to give a particular accolade to him. I had a judge call me right when this whole pandemic was starting, concerned about marriage licenses and what they were going to do because the courthouse was closed. And I was happy to say, well, let me tell you what we're doing here in York County. And Brian has done a great job of using technology to his advantage. And all of them, Allison and Dan Burns, have been doing a great job of using the services and the technology that we have in this building. So just a big thank you to all of them.
And thank you to all of you for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Judge Cook, look to see you back at the country club at some point. Judge Strong, get uptown or maybe back at our club at some point in the future. And of course, Judge Adams, thank you for taking the reins as PJ and joining us today. And we appreciate all three of you being here and answering these questions, given your presentation.
Thank you.
Josh.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And now we also, as we always try to do, we have our book donation. The book this week is Lucy and Andy Neanderthal, Bad to the Bones. And this book will be presented to the York Suburban Middle School Library, and we will make arrangements for each of you to be able to sign the book plate that will be placed inside the book in recognition of your program today. So thanks again, and look forward to getting that book plate to you for the book donation. Okay, we're on to next week's meeting, and this would be normally the point in the Rotary year where we go to People's Bank Park for the annual York Revolution baseball program. Unfortunately, we can't do that this year, but we will have both York Revolution President Eric Menzer and Atlantic League President Rick White joining us next week for a presentation. And I'm going to do my best to see if Eric can have hot dogs delivered to everybody at their houses during this presentation, since we can't be at the ballpark for some yummy food. So look forward to that program next week. As always, thanks to everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. This meeting is adjourned.